Admiral Kerr stood in the observation deck, his many eyes scanning the holographic monitors in front of him. His species, the Xanthal, had ruled vast stretches of space for centuries. They had conquered planets, defeated empires, and wiped out any species that posed a threat. Nothing ever truly surprised him anymore. That's why he was here, watching the human child. It was part of an agreement, a diplomatic exchange between the Xanthal Dominion and humanity. The child was only 10 cycles old, and yet she had been selected to take part in a high-level simulation designed to test the cognitive capabilities of alien species. The humans, despite their primitive technology and volatile nature, had agreed to send their brightest to be tested by their superior counterparts. Giker's lipless mouth curled into a tight smile. How quaint. He'd seen countless species try and fail at this simulation. Most didn't even last 5 minutes before being destroyed by overwhelming forces. He had little doubt that this child would be the same. She sat at the center of the training room, hands placed lightly on the console, her eyes focused on the holographic displays that filled the air in front of her. A small, innocent smile tugged at the edges of her lips as the simulation began, the scene unfolding before her like a battle in the stars. To Giker's surprise, the child didn't hesitate. In fact, she didn't flinch at all as the first wave of enemy ships appeared on her screens, stealthy vessels designed to overwhelm and confuse. Most cadets froze or panicked at first contact, but the child's hands moved with the precision of a seasoned commander, adjusting her ship's trajectory with remarkable ease. Her movements were fluid, controlled. Giker's curiosity piqued. He leaned in closer, watching her hands glide over the touch interface with an elegance he hadn't expected. The ship, small, sleek, and underpowered compared to the enemy's fleet, whipped through the stars with perfect precision. The enemy vessels launched their first wave of plasma shots, but the child was ready. In one swift motion, she twisted the ship out of the path of the attack, and the deadly bolts fizzled harmlessly in the distance. The Admiral's brow furrowed as the enemy ships continued to close in. Giker could feel the tension rising in his chest. No child, not even the brightest human prodigy, should be able to perform at this level. He had seen simulations fail countless times before, but something was different here. This child wasn't acting like a frightened novice. She was thinking, actively analyzing her situation. Giker's mind clicked. It was almost as if she wasn't just playing a game, but living it. There was an intensity in her gaze, a kind of focus that betrayed her age. Her ship was swift, yes, but it wasn't invincible. She couldn't keep dodging attacks forever. The Admiral's confidence returned. Soon enough, she'll make a mistake. The enemy ships, now in pursuit, would force her into a corner, and then the simulation would be over. It always happened the same way. No one could survive this long against such overwhelming odds, not even the most advanced species in the galaxy. Yet as the enemy closed in, Giker saw something that unsettled him, a flicker of something in the child's expression. It was not fear, but something far more dangerous. Calm. She was not backing down. Giker's thoughts narrowed. Perhaps the child wasn't simply playing at war. Perhaps she understood it, on a deeper, more instinctual level. Something in her eyes told him this was more than just a game. As the child's fingers moved decisively across the controls, setting her ship into a bold maneuver, Giker's smile faded. This was no ordinary test. It was something else. The simulation flickered, shifting to a new level of intensity. The child's hands moved rapidly, effortlessly, as though the controls were an extension of her own thoughts. Giker had seen many alien species try to master the simulation, but none had shown the kind of fluid coordination that this human child demonstrated. Her movements were smooth and unhesitating, and with each keystroke, she adjusted her ship's position in space. The enemy forces loomed ahead, an intimidating array of vessels, but the child seemed undeterred. The first wave of attackers appeared, a formation of sleek, high-tech ships designed for one purpose: to catch an unprepared target in a deadly ambush. The ships crept silently through the simulation, cloaked in shadows and surrounded by a field of debris. Most commanders, when faced with such a challenge, would freeze or miscalculate, unsure of how to react to an unseen threat. But the child, she didn't hesitate. Her fingers moved with purpose, and in a heartbeat, her ship had zigzagged through space, narrowly avoiding the first wave of fire from the enemy fleet. G'Kar leaned in, his sharp gaze fixated on the child. Impressive. She was no longer simply responding to the simulation. She was predicting the enemy's actions. The child wasn't just avoiding the attack, she was anticipating it, dodging in ways that would only make sense to someone with an intuitive grasp of the situation. The first wave of plasma shots missed her ship, flying past in brilliant streaks of light. The child's ship danced in the vacuum of space, its movements precise and calculated, avoiding death at every turn. G'Kar couldn't deny it. There was something unsettling about the way she controlled the ship. It was almost as if she understood the physics of the simulation better than the simulation itself. Her hands barely grazed the controls, and yet her ship moved like it was alive, flowing through space, each maneuver more graceful than the last. But that's when the second wave of enemy ships arrived, and G'Kar's expression grew more serious. This was the part of the simulation where most failed. The enemy fleet, now fully visible and far more aggressive, began their bombardment with deadly precision. They had the firepower to overwhelm any target. The child's ship could only dodge for so long. The Admiral's mouth curled into a thin smile as the child's ship was forced to accelerate, diving deeper into the asteroid field in a desperate attempt to avoid the incoming plasma fire. G'Kar thought it was a foolish move. The asteroids would only add to the chaos. In his experience, most simulations failed when participants took unnecessary risks. Yet something told him this wasn't just a random decision. The child wasn't just scrambling for safety, she was thinking ahead. He watched as her ship dove into the dense field, maneuvering between massive rocks and debris with an impossible precision. The enemy fleet followed, eager to corner her. For a moment, it looked like a trap. Surely, the child would be caught in the crossfire of her own narrow escape. But instead of fleeing blindly, she did something unexpected. She allowed the enemy to get closer, then used the surrounding asteroids to her advantage. As the enemy ships came in range, she suddenly swerved to the left, forcing them to collide with a massive asteroid, their course disrupted by the impact. G'Kar's eyes widened. She had just created a deadly obstacle for the enemy fleet with the very environment that seemed to threaten her. The enemy ships exploded into pieces as their momentum carried them straight into the asteroids. G'Kar's mind raced. This wasn't just blind luck, it was strategy. And not just any strategy. A human strategy. A reckless one, yet effective. A strategy based not on superior technology or advanced weaponry, but on exploiting the weaknesses of the enemy and using the environment to her advantage. For the first time in his long life, G'Kar felt a chill. He had underestimated the humans, thinking their intelligence and resourcefulness were limited. But here, in front of him, a child was proving that their capacity for survival and ingenuity went far beyond what he had ever imagined. G'Kar remained glued to the observation deck, his focus intense as the human child continued her deadly game. The simulation had become a battlefield in its own right, an intricate web of moving ships, asteroids, and explosions, and the child, impossibly, was at the center of it all. She was not merely surviving anymore. She was outplaying the system. G'Kar's mind churned. Could this really be happening? The child, with no formal training, was dismantling an advanced combat scenario designed to break even the most seasoned warriors. He leaned forward, narrowing his eyes as the child's next move unfolded. The enemy had regrouped, and now they outnumbered her fleet 3-1. Any rational commander would have retreated, tried to salvage what little was left. But not the child. She wasn't thinking like a cadet. She was thinking like a general, using every asset at her disposal to deceive, confuse, and overwhelm the enemy. Her ship darted forward, but not recklessly. She aimed directly for a cluster of enemy vessels, appearing to set herself up for certain destruction. Giker's breath caught in his throat. What was she doing? The enemy ships locked on, firing in unison, their plasma beams lighting up the simulation's dark expanse. Yet just as the beams closed in, the child executed a series of impossibly quick evasive maneuvers, turning her ship so sharply that it seemed to defy the laws of physics. She cut through the barrage like a knife through water, a streak of silver in the middle of the chaos. But the most astonishing part was what came next. As the child swerved, she didn't just escape. She used the momentum to push herself directly into the middle of the enemy formation, turning the tables in an instant. Giker's hand gripped the railing of the observation deck. She's not just dodging, she's luring them in. The child had set a trap. Her ship weaved through the enemy like a predator stalking prey, drawing the attackers into the perfect position. The Admiral's mind raced, trying to predict her next move. The child's strategy was reckless, almost insane, but there was a subtle brilliance to it. She was baiting the enemy, using their confidence against them, and when they had fully committed to the chase, she struck. In a single motion, she unleashed a devastating counterattack, catching the enemy fleet in a pincer movement. The first wave of attackers was destroyed in moments as her remaining ships opened fire, their weapons targeting key weak points in the enemy formations. The Admiral watched in disbelief as the child tore through the enemy ships, picking them off one by one, never once hesitating. Giker had seen many tactics in his time, decades of battles, countless war games, but this was something different. The human child, despite her limited experience, had understood a concept that many veterans still struggled with, the power of deception. She had led the enemy right into her trap, making them believe they had the upper hand. And in that belief, she had shattered their entire formation. As the last enemy ship exploded into a fiery bloom, Giker stood motionless, his sharp mind reeling from the implications. This was no accident. This was no mere game. The child's strategy was built on an understanding of warfare that was as old as civilization itself, to outthink the enemy. Giker's previous assumptions about humans began to crumble before his eyes. The child wasn't just a promising recruit, she was the embodiment of what humanity had always been capable of: adaptability, cunning, and the ability to turn seemingly hopeless situations into victory. The human race, despite their apparent lack of technology, had something far more dangerous: the instinct to survive against all odds. For the first time in his long career, the Admiral felt something he hadn't experienced in years: fear. He could no longer dismiss humanity as insignificant. The potential for destruction that lay within them, expressed so perfectly in this young child, was unlike anything Giker had expected. And this wasn't just a single child. This was a glimpse into the true power of humanity, a species that had only just begun to reveal its true potential. The simulation shifted once again, and Giker's attention sharpened. The child's fleet was down to a handful of ships, and the enemy, more numerous than ever, was closing in. The overwhelming forces had the advantage now. It was only a matter of time before the remaining ships were destroyed. Unless, of course, the child did something unexpected. As the enemy ships approached, Giker's gaze never left the child. Her eyes, wide with focus, scanned the battlefield. Her ship was out of position, surrounded by a fleet that far outclassed hers. Most commanders, in this moment of certain defeat, would call for a retreat or scatter their forces in an attempt to buy time. But the child didn't flinch. Instead, her hands hovered over the controls, fingers moving with the precision of a master. There was no hesitation. With a calm, deliberate motion, she ordered her fleet into an offensive position. The enemy was closing in fast, their weapons primed for the final strike. To any observer, it seemed as though the child was making a fatal mistake, pitting her already outnumbered fleet against a superior force. But to Giker, something was different. The child's face remained calm, her movements calculated, as if she knew something the enemy did not. The simulation had already proven that humans were unpredictable, capable of thinking outside the box, and now the child was demonstrating just how far that unpredictability could go. Without warning, the child issued the order that shocked Gikar to his core. She was sacrificing her remaining ships, her precious few assets, deliberately drawing the enemy in. The Admiral's pulse quickened. What is she thinking? The human child had set her course toward a dead zone in the simulation, a region devoid of asteroids, debris, or any natural formations to use as cover. It was a calculated move, but it seemed reckless, even foolish. If she failed, it would be the end. Gikar gripped the railing, watching the ships plunge into the heart of enemy territory, certain that the child was about to be obliterated. Then, with chilling precision, the child made her move. As the enemy ships closed in, she activated her ship's advanced cloaking devices, rendering her fleet invisible to the enemy sensors. For a moment, the enemy didn't realize what had happened. The child's fleet seemed to disappear, leaving nothing but the cold, empty space of the dead zone. The enemy commanders, confident in their victory, scattered their ships, searching the area for any sign of her fleet. Gikar stared, his mind racing. The child had turned the battlefield into a ghost story, and the enemy had fallen for it. She wasn't just hiding, she was baiting them, forcing the enemy into a trap of their own making. The enemy ships, spread thin and disoriented, began to drift aimlessly, unaware that they were being led into an ambush. Then, as if on cue, the child's ships emerged from their cloaking, attacking from multiple angles at once. In a flawless execution of tactical brilliance, she fired off a series of well-placed shots that crippled the enemy's fleet. Gikar could hardly believe his eyes. The child had sacrificed her fleet in order to draw the enemy into a trap, where she could attack with precision and speed. What seemed like a fatal flaw had become a masterstroke. The first enemy ships began to explode, their weapon systems destroyed in rapid succession. The remaining vessels, now disorganized and scattered, were no match for the child's remaining forces. Within moments, the battle that had seemed lost was over. The child had won. Gikar felt his heart pounding in his chest. He had been so sure of the outcome, but now, standing on the edge of his disbelief, he couldn't help but be in awe. The human child had turned the tides with a single, brilliant decision, a move that defied the very logic of battle. She hadn't relied on superior firepower or advanced technology. She had relied on something more fundamental, more primal, the art of misdirection, the ability to confuse and manipulate the enemy into making mistakes. The simulation ended with a final explosion, and the screen went dark. The child sat back in her chair, blinking in disbelief as the results flashed across the display. She had done it. She had won. Gikar's mind was still racing. This isn't just luck. The child had proven something undeniable. Humanity was not a species to be underestimated. The power of their unpredictability, their willingness to sacrifice and improvise, had led them to victory. Gikar finally understood. It was not technology or numbers that made humanity dangerous. It was their intelligence, their capacity to outthink and outmaneuver any challenge. As the simulation ended, the room fell eerily quiet. The child, still in her seat, stared at the display screen, her wide eyes reflecting the chaotic battle she had just won. Gikar, however, was not focused on her. His mind raced as he tried to process what he had just witnessed. The simulation had been designed to challenge the finest minds in the galaxy, yet a human child, barely a decade old, had completed it with a mix of grace and ferocity that defied logic. He looked at the data streaming across the screen. Victory had been achieved, but not through brute force or advanced weaponry. No, it had been won through strategy. The child had turned the entire simulation into a game of deception, manipulating the very environment around her to force the enemy into making catastrophic mistakes. It was a method that Gikar had only ever seen in the most experienced generals, the kind of subtle manipulation that made an adversary believe they were in control, only to watch them fall into a carefully laid trap. But the implications of what had just happened were far more significant than he had initially realized. He had assumed humanity was a species that could be manipulated, easily controlled with force and advanced technology. But now he saw the flaw in that assumption. Humanity, at its core, was not just resilient, it was innovative. It could adapt to any situation and think its way out of even the most impossible odds. Kara had seen countless civilizations fall, their leaders driven by pride, and their military tactics grounded in strength. But humanity's strength lay not in the size of their fleet or their weapons, but in their minds. He could feel something inside him shift, a deep-rooted concern creeping in where there had once been only indifference. Was this the future of humanity? Could they become a force capable of challenging even the might of the Xanthal Dominion? The child turned, her face beaming with an expression of shock and disbelief. "Did I win?" she asked, her voice light and uncertain, as though unsure of her accomplishment. G'Kar blinked, momentarily taken aback by her innocence. For a moment, he saw her as nothing more than a child, her small frame unable to grasp the weight of the moment. And yet, in that very same instant, he understood something far more profound. This child was no anomaly. She was a representation of humanity itself, capable of growth, unpredictability, and brilliance. If this was just the beginning of humanity's potential, then the galaxy was about to be shaken in ways that no one had anticipated. "Yes, you won," G'Kar replied, his voice cold but measured. The words were simple, but there was something in his tone that made them seem heavy, as if the victory of this child carried the weight of an entire species. The child blinked, still unsure whether it was real, her small hands shaking slightly as she adjusted the interface. "Wow, I didn't expect that." G'Kar's mind continued to churn as the child's words faded into the background. What now? His species had never encountered a threat like this before. The Xanthal had dominated galaxies for eons, but humanity was something different. They were unpredictable, dangerous in ways that G'Kar couldn't yet understand. As he studied the child more closely, he realized that her victory was not just a personal achievement, it was a warning. This child, with all her innocence and simplicity, had just demonstrated the raw, untapped potential of humanity. The future of the Xanthal Dominion could be threatened by this kind of creativity and cunning, these unpredictable tactical decisions that could turn the tide of any battle. He paused, pondering what to do next. Should the Xanthal Dominion engage humanity directly? Should they attempt to quash this emerging threat before it grew any more dangerous? Or perhaps, G'Kar found himself wondering, perhaps it would be more beneficial to observe, to learn from humanity and their potential. They had just proven that they were capable of much more than expected. For now, the child was unaware of the immense power she held within her. She was simply a child playing a game. But G'Kar knew that this game was no longer just about a simulation. It was a glimpse into the future of a species that might one day challenge the entire galaxy. G'Kar stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the child, who was now glancing around the room in wonder, as though still processing her victory. She had no idea that her actions had begun a cascade of thoughts in the Admiral's mind, a series of realizations that would ripple through the fabric of the galaxy itself. He had watched countless species rise and fall, each one following predictable patterns of warfare, technology, and politics. The Xanthal Dominion had always emerged victorious, not because they were invincible, but because they had mastered the art of control. They knew how to break down their enemies, to identify their weaknesses, and exploit them without hesitation. They understood the rules of war, and they had the firepower to ensure those rules were never broken. But humanity was different. As the child smiled, clearly proud of her success, G'Kar felt a deep sense of unease gnaw at him. He had never feared any species. His people had crushed rebellions, quelled uprisings, and extinguished entire civilizations in the blink of an eye. But the child's actions, her strategy, Her creativity had cut through the veneer of confidence he had worn for so long. What if we're not prepared for this? The thought clung to him, relentless and invasive. The Xanthal Dominion had never faced a species capable of thinking so differently, one that could manipulate their environment and their adversaries in ways no one had expected. Most species relied on strength, numbers, or advanced technology to fight their battles, but humanity had something far more elusive and dangerous: the ability to adapt and learn, even in the most dire of circumstances. Hikar shifted his gaze to the control panel, watching as the simulation's results continued to scroll across the screen. The child's fleet had been annihilated, every single ship destroyed. But it had been her final move that made all the difference. Her ability to turn what appeared to be a losing scenario into a complete victory was something beyond comprehension. And it wasn't just luck. The child had studied the situation, anticipated every move of her enemies, and used everything at her disposal to outwit them. For the first time, Hikar found himself questioning his earlier assumptions. The Xanthal had always viewed humanity as insignificant, primitive. They had no place in the galactic order, no power to challenge the mighty fleets of the Dominion. But this child had shattered that belief with a single simulation. As he turned toward the observation window, watching the distant stars twinkle in the vast emptiness of space, Hikar felt the weight of his decision pressing down on him. The Dominion had always been the apex predator of the galaxy, a force that was feared and respected across countless star systems. But that respect was beginning to feel fragile. Humanity was no longer a mere curiosity. It was a challenge, one that could not be ignored. What if the humans decided to rise? What if they learned from this child, from the countless others like her who had yet to be discovered? The thought of an entire species, united in their ability to outsmart, to outthink, to defy logic. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. The child, still grinning, turned toward him. "Did I do something wrong?" Her voice was soft, uncertain, as though the weight of her actions hadn't quite reached her yet. She didn't realize the storm she had unleashed. "No," Hikar replied, his tone calm, though his mind was anything but. "You did exactly what you were meant to do." The child smiled again, clearly pleased with the approval. But as Hikar watched her, something deeper stirred within him. It wasn't just the child he was afraid of now. It was the entire human race. The implications of what he had just witnessed went far beyond this one simulation. Humanity's capacity to learn, to adapt, to evolve, was something that could threaten the very fabric of the galaxy. The Dominion had faced challenges before, but never from a species like this. He was no longer simply an observer. Hikar understood that, whether he liked it or not, humanity was becoming a force to be reckoned with, and it was only a matter of time before the galaxy would have to reckon with them. The next few hours felt like a blur to Hikar. He had sent the child away, her curiosity satisfied for now, but the questions that had been festering in his mind refused to fade. As the Admiral sat alone in the darkened command center, the weight of the implications pressed heavily on his shoulders. Humanity, as he had witnessed, was not a species easily dismissed. Their ability to adapt, to think on their feet, and to manipulate their surroundings with such precision could make them formidable opponents, or even allies. But Hikar was no fool. The idea of an alliance with humanity felt as dangerous as it was appealing. He had watched too many lesser species rise to power, only to collapse under the weight of their own ambition. The Xanthal Dominion had made their mark on the galaxy not through kindness, but through strength, through the relentless pursuit of dominance. There was no room for weakness in their eyes, and humanity's unpredictable nature could easily be seen as a weakness, an unstable force that could spiral out of control. He stood up abruptly, pacing the room, his thoughts a whirlwind. His first instinct had been to dismiss the humans entirely, to maintain the status quo, to ignore the small, insignificant species struggling to survive on the fringes of the galaxy. But now, after seeing the child's remarkable capabilities, he knew that humanity was anything but insignificant. He could no longer ignore the possibility that the humans might one day pose a serious threat. If they managed to unify their scattered factions, if they refined the strategies they were capable of, they could challenge even the mightiest of empires. Giker's chest tightened at the thought of the Xanthal Dominion, the force he had always believed to be invincible, being outwitted by a species still in its infancy. It was a bitter thought, one that threatened the very core of his pride. The Dominion had long viewed the galaxy as their domain, a place where their rule was absolute, their influence far-reaching. But Giker had seen firsthand what the human mind was capable of, and now he could not shake the realization that their very unpredictability made them far more dangerous than any other species in the galaxy. A sudden thought struck him. What if humanity was already preparing for something greater? What if the child's victory had been just a hint at what was to come? He remembered the vast archives of intelligence the Dominion maintained on lesser species. Human history had been filled with moments of remarkable survival, against odds that would have broken any other race. Time and again, they had fought wars, had rebuilt from the ashes, and had risen from near extinction to become a force to be reckoned with. Could it be that they were just waiting for the right moment to strike? The more Giker thought about it, the more unsettling it became. If humanity was capable of creating such brilliant minds without the resources of more advanced civilizations, what would happen when they truly unleashed their potential? What would they become once they discovered the true power of their intelligence? Could they replicate what they did in the simulation on a real battlefield? Could they take on entire fleets, entire systems, using only their wits? Giker's hand clenched into a fist, his mind awash with conflicting thoughts. The Dominion had always been a force to be feared, but now, for the first time in a long while, he wasn't so sure. There were whispers among the higher echelons of the Dominion, murmurs about the human race's growing influence, their rapid technological advancements. The Xanthal leadership would have to make a choice soon. Would they take the threat seriously and prepare for the possibility of war, or would they continue to underestimate humanity until it was too late? The truth was, Giker couldn't predict what would happen next. Humanity had the potential to either become an ally or a deadly adversary. One thing was certain, though, the galaxy was changing, and humanity had just made it clear that it would no longer be ignored. Giker's thoughts were in turmoil as he sat alone in his chamber, staring out into the void of space. The stars outside glimmered like distant promises, unyielding and unmoving, while inside him, the feeling of uncertainty gnawed at his core. He had faced countless threats over the centuries, from civilizations that rose and fell like the passing of seasons, to the endless wars that defined the ebb and flow of galactic history. But this was different. The human child had shown him something that could not be ignored. Something that would echo across the galaxy for years to come. Their potential, their creativity, was no longer a curiosity. It was a force. Humanity was no longer a species to be overlooked. They were an unknown variable, one that could shape the future in ways that even the most advanced minds of the Dominion could not yet predict. Giker's mind raced through the possibilities. Could he ignore humanity, dismiss them as a fleeting anomaly in the grand scheme of the galaxy? That had been his first instinct, but after what he had seen, he knew he couldn't. The child's brilliance, the instinctive command of her fleet, despite the overwhelming odds, was not just a product of luck or chance. It was something deeper, something that ran through humanity's core. It was in their nature to adapt, to learn, to grow, and to overcome. The Dominion had always thrived on power and control, believing that it was their unassailable strength that kept them at the top of the galactic hierarchy. But humanity had shown that power could be outmaneuvered. Their minds could turn a losing battle into a victory, as the child had so elegantly demonstrated. Giker had to acknowledge what had become painfully clear. Humans would not be beaten easily. And now, the question lingered. What would the Dominion do? How would they respond to this new threat? Giker had seen the reports. Humanity was rapidly advancing in technology, uniting their fractured colonies, and building a military presence that could soon rival those of the most powerful empires. The simulation was just the beginning. As humanity grew, so too would their capacity for warfare, strategy, and subterfuge. If the child's victory was any indication, humanity's true strength lay in their unpredictability and their relentless drive to survive. G'Kar stood up, walking to the large viewport of his chamber. He could see the sprawling fleet of the Xanthal Dominion beyond, ships that had been built for domination, for expansion, for crushing all in their path. But now, a new understanding lingered in the air. He was no longer certain of his people's invincibility. The galaxy was changing, and humanity was at the heart of that change. For the first time, G'Kar considered the possibility of an alliance, though the idea was fraught with uncertainty. An alliance with humanity could offer the Dominion a new path forward, one that took into account the unpredictability of this emerging species. They could learn from humanity, adapt, and perhaps even find a way to coexist in a galaxy that was rapidly becoming more complex and unpredictable. But could the Dominion ever trust humanity enough to forge such an alliance? Could they accept that the very thing they feared most, the human mind, could become both a weapon and a safeguard for the future? G'Kar exhaled slowly, his mind no longer filled with certainty, but with the weight of the choices ahead. He knew one thing for certain: humanity had the potential to alter the balance of power in the galaxy. The question now was not whether they could challenge the Dominion, but whether the Dominion could adapt to humanity's rise, or whether they would fall under the weight of their own arrogance. The future was unwritten. Humanity had proven that the rules of war, and perhaps even the rules of the galaxy itself, were not as fixed as G'Kar had once believed. And that, more than anything, terrified him.